Well, greetings, everyone. I am so honored and excited today to be interviewing Barbara Hand Clow. And let me introduce her, and then we're going to be discussing her recent amazing fiction trilogy and the final book that's coming out October 12th, Revelations from the Source. Barbara Hand Clow is an internationally acclaimed ceremonial teacher, author, astrologer, and Mayan calendar researcher. She's written many books, including The Pleiadian Agenda, Alchemy of Nine Dimensions, Awakening the Planetary Mind, Astrology and the Rising of Kundalini, and the Mayan Code. She's taught at sacred sites throughout the world and has an active astrological website, which I will list in the information below this video. But I am just enormously honored to be in this conversation with you today, Barbara. Your work has influenced me and my work for decades now. I incorporate a lot of your writings in my teachings, in the classes that I do. And this recent trilogy that we're going to be talking about today is fiction. And I want to talk with you about why you chose to write this fiction trilogy when all of your other books are nonfiction. But to me, this trilogy, Revelations of the Ruby Crystal, Revelations of the Aquarian Age, and this final book coming out, Revelations from the Source, are weaving together so much wisdom and insight about this profound time of transformation that we're in on the planet, and particularly what it means to be shifting out of the age of Pisces into the age of Aquarius. So before we dive into some of the themes in the book, can you just talk about why it is you chose to write this in fiction format, and maybe just give us the overarching themes that are coming through in the whole trilogy?
Well, thank you for having me, Heather. And it's very touching to think of you using some of my ideas when you're teaching. Thank you for that. And I think what happened, I'm at this point now where I can reflect on things because I finished such a large body of work, because it took me 10 to 11 years to write this trilogy, and it was totally all absorbing. And I think what happened is I came to the end of the data bank that I'm bringing forth in this lifetime. And I think that happened with Alchemy of Nine Dimensions, which is a scientific analysis of the Pleiadian agenda, which is a channeled book on multidimensionality. So I came to that end point of writing nonfiction works describing different parts of the data bank I've been working on in this lifetime. And then I wanted to do a lot of storytelling. I wanted to create characters who could experience some of the things that I've been teaching for so many years, and who could play with some of the ideas that I've developed in my work. And then, of course, that meant that the characters had to be extremely intelligent, scientifically knowledgeable, very knowledgeable about therapy and depth analysis. And so I kind of got to create a whole group of people that I would just really like to hang out with every day. And so I did hang out with them every day. And what was wonderful is that the characters themselves, what I did was I sat in my writing room and decided I went into my inner consciousness and said, I'm ready to write a work of fiction, a trilogy. And I want to know how to find characters. And at that point, the Pleiadians came forth because they're the ones who communicate with me. And I think, by the way, they're really just my higher self, my kind of soul body consciousness. And they came forth and gave me the names and ages and background and educational background and what people were doing in their lives for work. And they came through with explicit names, ages, dates for all of the characters except one. And then later on, that character, Lorenzo Giannini, appeared in the middle of writing the first book, Revelations of the Ruby Crystal. So it was really extraordinary. It took about 3 or 4 hours. I had a bunch of yellow legal pads that I always keep handy, and pens. And I wrote it all out as fast as I could. Then I went into the kitchen to see my husband, Jerry, and told him what happened. And he listened. I told him about the characters. And he listened to me explaining who they were and what they were like. And he just said, you have to write that trilogy. And this was a major breakthrough. At this point, Jerry and I have been married 48 years. So you have these series of levels of breakthrough. Because in the past, whenever a new idea came through me, like say working with the planet Chiron or working with the Mayan code, Jerry would say, Chiron? You know, he was always like, oh my God, what's next? This time he was excited. And he helped me a lot, which was a wonderful experience because he's a terrific writer.
What's amazing too is that in writing it in fiction form and developing these characters, they're really embodying the energies that the books are talking to us about what is possible for us in this time of transformation. So it's extraordinary to see them as models and as embodying the energies of being multidimensional, being in this alchemical time of transformation, which I think brings it alive in such a powerful way. And I love how you weave in ceremony as part of the process too, and how that's critical in terms of our being in this time of transformation. And that's part of how you've impacted me so profoundly, is the way in which you weave that ancient wisdom and the understanding of embodiment and the sacred feminine with the multidimensional, transpersonal nature of spiritual awakening. And it really comes together in these characters.
Well, thank you for that. And of course, that's coming from being a ceremonial teacher all over the world for many, many years. But what I found the most interesting regarding that, and then what you just said, is that when I work in ceremony, all 9 dimensions come through. When I create a ceremony, the place is important first of all, and then the time is important. I always use astrology to get the correct time, and if I get it right with the time and the place, then everything becomes multidimensional. And the students also suddenly start experiencing many dimensions. Some students who have never experienced that before. So I have to admit, I'm amazed I could do it in a book. It's one of those things in books. I often see authors who have really amazing things to teach, and I've been to their workshops and I've seen them do amazing things. But I say to myself, how could they ever put it in a book form that would actually take you right to that ceremony and be in the part of that ceremony? And I really feel like I succeeded at that. And I just am thrilled. I'm really, really happy about that. So you went right for the thing that makes me the happiest about this trilogy.
Well, it's remarkable. And I could experience myself feeling energetic shifts as I was working through the trilogy, and it got deep. The experience got deeper and deeper as you move through each book, which is great.
Heather, that's actually very significant. Have you ever read my Mind Chronicles trilogy? I, the Centaur, Heart of the Christos, and Signet of Atlantis?
No.
You may not have encountered that. Okay, well, when I was in graduate school, my graduate thesis was a comparison of Jungian psychoanalytic therapy and past life regression under hypnosis. And the reason and Matthew Fox was my director, by the way. I had a perfect person.
I love his work.
Good old Matthew Fox. And so what happened for me in graduate school, to tell you the truth, I didn't want to waste time going to graduate school, but I thought if I could explore that comparison, it would be valuable to me, because the idea I had was that past life regression under hypnosis is a lot cheaper than Jungian psychotherapy, just because of the amount of time involved. And so once the trilogy was out, it came out between 1986 and 1992. So that trilogy is based on 100 past life regressions that I did into my own past lives. But the
Oh,
deeper I got into it, the more I realized I don't have to just explore my own past lives. I can actually just explore almost anything. And so I basically time traveled over 100,000 years of human evolution on the Earth. And so what fascinated me after I finished it was the number of people who contacted me to say that they could be in the regression with me and they could actually feel the energy. I had people contact me who were part of group ceremonies who were someplace else in the ceremony, and they would tell me like what happened in the ceremony from their point of view. So that's when I realized 30 years ago that you could create that kind of energy in fiction. And so in this trilogy, I've taken it to a whole other degree.
oh, that is amazing. That's beautiful. And I think it is a part of what's guiding us in being able to be in that energy of the alchemical transformation that we're needing to be in this time. And I
Mhm.
want to talk, I mean, you so powerfully weave in a lot of themes about what we've experienced in the age of Pisces and some of the distortions that we've gotten caught into in that time, and how part of this moving out of the end of the age of Pisces is about reclaiming the true meaning of what we were meant to experience and learn in that age, and to clear the trauma, clear the distortions. And you
Mhm.
talk a lot about the damage done by organized religion. And you speak a lot about the Vatican and about the priestly sexual abuse. Can you talk more about why that's such an important theme in the books?
Yeah. Well, when we come to the end of an age, which is we've been in the end of the age of Pisces for 100, 200 years, what happens is all of the unresolved trauma and all of the stuff that didn't work well and that got distorted, as you said very well, all that we as a body, a group of people who are alive on the planet, we have to go through a whole series of emotional and psychological and physical experiences in order to clear those forces and those energies. And so all of that comes through us. And so you've heard the old saying that you don't want to be born during, times of trial. Well, the hardest times on planet Earth are the end of one age and the entry into the other age. And we're at the apex of that at this point. And so, therefore, it was very important to have this trilogy do a lot of work on the issues that needed to be cleared. And one of the fascinating things about that to me was that one character, Simon Appel, is Jewish and comes from a wonderful old, very well educated Jewish family. And then he ends up falling in love with a Catholic scholar. And then they go through their stuff. That's in Revelations of the Ruby Crystal. And for people who really want to know who these characters are, you really should go back and read the earlier books, because in a trilogy, the first book introduces the real fabric of the lives of the characters. And so the more you know that as you get into the more advanced levels of trilogy, because like in the third book, I don't talk about that stuff very much. It's spiced in there and it's kind of fun to see how they're getting along, but you don't get that depth, if you know what I mean. So, because of Sarah and Simon coming together, then I could deal with the theme of the Age of Aries, because the Age of Aries is before Pisces, and these go in reverse, which always confuses people. They go backwards. Now we're going into Aquarius. So, the Age of Aries is about 100 BC until back to 2200 BC. And this is the age of organized warfare on the planet Earth. Then the age of Pisces is the age of organized development of organized religions. And that's all religions, even though I'm only dealing with three or four in this trilogy. And so what happened, unfortunately, right around 0 AD, is Christianity in particular, which became the dominant religion, new religion very quickly, had a tendency to suppress information a lot. And so they suppressed a whole lot of information about the age of Aries. And then what they did is they turned around and they took all the Aryan gods of war and they turned it into wars for Christianity and wars for God. And so unfortunately, that's a distortion 2,000 years ago that really distorted Christianity. And so I really wanted to really develop that theme, because I think once people get that one, I think they could process that one pretty well, because as we go into Aquarius, it's time for war to end. It really is time for war to end. We're going into another whole way of dealing with aggression on this planet, and it's not going to be organized warfare. It could be electronic warfare. It could be artificial information. It could be robotics. There could be that stuff. Virtual reality. Everybody could go off and do a war session in a virtual, reality cube. But we've got to get a hold of this one. We've really got to process this one, because it can't go on anymore. It's so destructive to the planetary ecology.
Well, and I think what you're, describing so eloquently is that we carried the shadow side of the age of Aries into the age of Pisces, and some of the message of the spiritual teachers and guides of the Piscean age, Buddha and Christ. And I want to talk in particular about your theme about the true meaning of Jesus. They came to help us reconnect with that energy of love and that deep understanding of our capacity to connect with spiritual awareness within ourselves. But that then got distorted by this kind of controlling power over model that continued then into religion. And can you talk a little bit about that theme that you really work in terms of describing and exposing some of that abuse of power in the Vatican in particular?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the whole situation with priestly sexual abuse and the Vatican over the last 2,000 years. This is not just the last 100 years. We find evidence for this going right back to 400 AD and all the way through. And a lot of it has to do with financial corruption. For example, you didn't have to be a celibate to be a priest until 1000 AD. In other words, before that, that was not a requirement. And some people don't know that. And so in 1000 AD, the church was having a lot of problems, losing a whole lot of resources because of priests who had children. And then their wives could inherit and the children could inherit and all that. And so the church set up a celibacy rule for priests so that they could control the assets of the priests. And you can understand it, because the church trains you, then you get a job, and then the church wants to hold on to everything. You can see the logic of it. But the problem with it is that it just does not work. And celibacy creates a huge amount of sexual abuse and distortion within the clergy. And the book goes into great detail about statistics and how large this thing really is. It's much, much bigger than people realize, actually. Although people are more aware now than they were like 30, 40 years ago. So that's been just a huge distortion, because the church is all about religious community for families. And yet, what are you going to do when you have to fear for the actual safety of the children? Which, of course, all that's being processed now. And it can't be it can't be hidden.
Well, and again, it's such a powerful theme in the books about how we need to bring these things to the light of consciousness in order to heal them and clear them. And that can help us then move into these new paradigms. But another piece that you weave in the books so powerfully is, there's that distortion and abuse of sexuality with the priestly sexual abuse, and that it's also distorting and blocking our awareness of sacred sexuality. Right. And that theme that you highlight of the true meaning of Jesus and of his relationship with Mary Magdalene becomes a really important theme in the book, and in how the characters experience that profound spiritual expansion of sacred sexuality in their own lives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a major theme. And then the different characters, Simon and Sarah and Armando and Jennifer's wife, there's some wonderful work on sacred sexuality between couples, including older people. And at the same time, that's the light side. That's the sunny side of the whole situation. The other thing I found myself exploring is that how the issue of how evil actually gets into the world. And this was a whole development in the trilogy because I created the character Armando.
Mm.
And Armando is a painter, and he's a very, very high consciousness person from a really wonderful family. But he was abused during his first confession by a priest when he was only 7 or 8 years old. And so Armando, in the first two books, is a wonderful, gigantic human struggling with the forces of evil. And then in the third book, in Source, we start to understand the whole issue of how evil actually gets into the world through sexual distortion. And there's one line in the book, and I'm probably not going to quote it right exactly, but one character just finally gets really pissed off at another character and makes the comment that hell isn't about what happens after death. Hell is about being alive on the earth and being sexually abused. And that was a very, very powerful line because sexual abuse is hellish. And the minute that people get into it and get involved with it, get involved with pornography, whatever people are doing, you are inviting evil, not only into yourself, but you're inviting evil into the world. And so in Source, there's a wonderful, through ceremony and through different issues, there are wonderful scenes on dealing with the reality of evil in this world, because it's here. And I don't know whether it's always been here. I think it probably has been, although I'm not sure. I kind of play around with the idea that evil came from humans experiencing cataclysms, especially 12,000 years ago, and then going into starvation and deprivation and sexual abuse. So I'm not sure that evil has to be in this world, but certainly we're never going to get rid of it. Now it's here unless we start to understand how that works.
Well, and I want to circle back to the whole theme of, these planetary cataclysms, but just following up with this theme of sexual abuse, it's profound in the final book how you describe Armando's healing and clearing of what you described as the reptilian part of himself, and how that is so tied in with fear and desire and trauma. And can you talk more about that? Because I felt like that part of the book was incredibly powerful in guiding us in how we can clear that trauma and how it can pull us into those dark energies, but come into a transformational process as he did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and what you're, of course, getting after is this whole issue of reptilian influence in our world, which is something I've puzzled about for the last 50 years, and you probably have too. Research by David Icke and different people, and also in terms of Christian theology, the issue of the archons and these kind of overwhelming, potent forces that influence human beings. And I don't think that I answered all the questions by any means in this trilogy on this issue, because I'm still trying to figure it out myself, to tell you the truth. But I do think that I did a pretty good job of kind of showing how it affects us and how it influences us and what it can do to us and how it can distort us. And toward the end of the trilogy, see, when you're writing something like this, it's a work in progress all the way through. And like at the very end of the book, when I was finishing the manuscript at the end of 2020, that's how that timeline issue of there you are finishing a major work of art, but things are still changing and things are still going on, which I actually dealt with in an afterword. I was able to deal with some of those issues in the afterword in the book. But I started edging closer and closer to the possibility that Jesus is actually an extraterrestrial or a cosmic being who came to the planet Earth. And I didn't really resolve those issues. Even Pope Francis finally got into it at this point in the book. And the issue came up of the possibility, which is something that I actually think is true, the possibility that Pope knows all about where Jesus really came from. And that the Pope doesn't, then there's an issue of when is the Pope going to reveal the truth about this? Because the story behind what might be going on is actually beautiful and exquisite. The basic idea would be that for the age of Pisces, at the beginning of the age of Pisces, 2,000 years ago, that Jesus actually, in the novel, he's like the first human who ever did it. And that Jesus actually came from a cosmic source to this planet and then lived a human incarnation. And the interesting thing about that issue, my master's is in early church theology, just like it is with my character, Sarah. And the interesting thing about that is if you go back and look at all those arguments during the first 500 years of Catholic history about who is Jesus? Is he man? Is he God? Is he an incarnate from the spirit? What is he? You actually start reading those, you can see that this could have been a bunch of theologians who knew that Jesus came from some kind of off-planet source, some other planet in the universe. And what they really were trying to thrash out was, well, what was he? Was he an extraterrestrial? Was he a human? And as we go into the age of Aquarius, these ideas aren't as radical to us as they might have been, say, 300 years ago. So I just created my characters and I let it fly. And different characters had different ideas about those things.
Well, that's part of what's beautiful when you're creating those different characters. They can be dialogue with each other and working out their own different perspectives on it all. Mm-hmm. But you also talk a lot about the importance of the relics and the importance of sacred sites and the energies that they hold in terms of all of this. Can you say more about that?
Well, this is a very mysterious field of information that I've been, again, following most of my life. And I think there's a tremendous suppression around the power of sacred objects and the power of relics. And if you go back to the medieval times, they used these relics, which is sell for like literally millions of dollars. Or we see the painting by Leonardo da Vinci, Salvator Mundi, being bought by a person in Saudi Arabia for $450 million 2 years ago, 3 years ago, because somehow that Saudi sheikh thinks that the power in that painting could actually influence him and his country and his family. So if you get into the more esoteric level of thing, there is a tradition of relics and sacred objects in all religious traditions. And so in Christianity, basically Catholicism, this tradition has to do with the relics coming from the saints. And so another theme in the trilogy going all the way through is that Simon Appel, Sarah's husband, is a researcher on the Talpiot tomb in Jerusalem. Actually, there's 2 Talpiot tombs. And there's been a huge flurry going on over the last 10, 15, 20 years over some of the relics in Jerusalem and some of the tombs in Jerusalem and of the ossuaries. And there's a lot of proof right now that the tomb of Jesus was discovered around 15 years ago, the Talpiot tomb. So Simon is exploring all of that data, and he works for the New York Times and constantly reporting on this issue. And so I was trying to get after some of those kind of hotbeds of how does religion continue to impact us as deeply as it does? Somehow it's operating through physical plane levels, and it's operating through second dimensional levels, which is the lower dimension below the third dimension that we exist in. So I was really trying to use these wonderful, brilliant characters to explore that. And Sarah, of course, is a psychic, and then Simon is a very classic left-brain researcher. So between the two of them, they flesh a lot of the stuff out.
And you also weave in not only the power of relics, but the whole theme of blood sacrifice and how that is a part of what's allowed organized religion and Catholicism in particular to maintain its power.
Yeah, so I really went into the sacraments deeply and examined them in terms of the church using the sacraments to mind control people. And some of this information is not going to be pleasant for readers, especially readers processing Catholicism. And I was once a Catholic, by the way. And so what I'm interested in isn't that communion or confession aren't powerful ways to transmit information and consciousness. What I was after is a power-mad church, global church, using these wonderful sacred sources that we have. Like, for example, I used to be able to take communion and keep the host and heal people when I was still a Catholic. So I'm not trying to get rid of the power of the sacraments. I wanted to look deeply into the abuse of by the church of the sacraments, because if the people start to realize that their sacred sources are being distorted and used instead of being a source for them to access divine consciousness, then they're going to start to fight for the sacraments. They're going to fight for communion. They're going to fight for the different levels of the sacraments, because the church, the Catholic Church, has a rich repository of sacramental power and sacramental knowledge that has unfortunately gotten distorted as we went. After all, this is the oldest like global level kind of religion on the planet. And well, that's, I'd like to say in the West, of course. We're talking about the power of Catholicism in the West. But for Western people, that's a big issue, the power of the sacraments. I mean, isn't it?
It is. And again, it's the power of ceremony too. And part of, as you're saying, my sense of a lot of what you're writing about in the book is how do we reclaim the true mystical origins of these sacred relics, these sacred sacraments, and clear away the distortion that's been placed on top of it by institutionalized religion, which is what's attaching to that shadow side of Aries, the power over dynamic. Because what is so extraordinary about the meaning of what Jesus came to embody and teach and these sacraments is that we each have the capacity within us to open to this profound connection with spirit and to be in that transformation. Yeah. And we don't have to look for some power outside of us to control that or control our experience of that. Which weaves in with one of the main themes you talk about in terms of the Aquarian Age is it's reclaiming the sovereignty of the individual and getting out of that power over dynamic, getting out of the ways that manifests in war, in mind control, and reclaiming our true freedom and reclaiming the truth.
Yeah, and I do think that's what the Age of Aquarius is going to be all about, and is already starting to be all about. And so you can see why there are such tremendous forces right now attempting to control the individual. For example, one of the struggles we're dealing with regarding the issues with COVID-19 is the issue of the Great Reset. And some of the multi-billionaires, even soon we're going to have trillionaires, who are attempting to take over the total control of the individual. And that's not what the Age of Aquarius is about. If I could say something optimistic, and I do think this is a very hard time right now, it would be that I don't think they're going to get away with it, because what they're trying to do is so counter to the meaning of the Age of Aquarius.
And don't you think, Barbara, I mean, just like we saw how the Age of Aries, which I think the deeper meaning of that was the intention of our experience and exploration of separation and individuation. And it got distorted into that theme of power over conquest, war. That as we're moving into the Age of Aquarius, the deeper, I mean, the theme that I like to use as, you know, an expression of the Aquarian paradigm is the sovereignty of the self in the sanctity of community and in unity with cosmic consciousness. That it is about reclaiming that, and you talk a lot in the books about the importance of reclaiming that sovereignty over our own bodies, reclaiming our capacity to come into our own sovereignty of self and escape mind control. And how then that allows us to open to the freedom and the creative expressions of the Aquarian age. But it feels to me like the shadow side of that can become an over idealization of world order for our safety, and the movement into the increasing control of AI and these mega corporations and big pharma and tech in particular. That, would you see that as both the backlash against the Aquarian paradigms we're meant to move into, or the distortion of the deeper meaning of it?
I think that those forces, the global elite forces, have always been on this planet. This is one of the few things that I think has always been here. Go back to Atlantis, go back to Lemuria. I think they're always there. But the question is, what does the individual do about that? And so in my world and universe, the only thing that the individual can do is to embody their soul consciousness in their lifetime, in their third dimensional lifetime. And we are making incredible strides right now in understanding how the soul embodiment functions for us in our everyday third dimensional life. And I think that no matter what kind of global elite forces are trying to control us and mind control us, I don't think it works when a person has an embodied soul consciousness. Like for me, the only thing anybody could do to me is just kill me, because I'm not going to stop being the person that I am with soul embodied consciousness. So in terms of the strides that we've been making, Jung, the work of Carl Gustavus Jung, was an incredible breakthrough. And now we have the work basically brought in by Michael Newton, the therapy that gets into life between lives, where Michael Newton actually has managed to describe the landscape of the disembodied soul, just the soul level of consciousness, and that he's actually managed to help us understand like how between our lifetimes, how we choose to find ways to embody our soul in this realm. So the main Jungian character is Lorenzo Giannini. He's an Italian, he's a Roman analyst, and he's the greatest analyst of Rome. He's a little bit almost like a Carl Jung in Rome as a character. And he's not only taking people into their past lives and helping them explore the past, he's also working with contacts from at the soul level and helping the characters to see how the embodiment of their soul is functioning in the lifetime portrayed in the book. So I think the most advanced level of thought in the trilogy is in the area of soul embodiment, because I think that if I was going to make a prediction as an astrologer, I'd have to say that I think the forces of mind control and global elite control, artificial information, et cetera, are going to get worse before they start to improve. And if people don't develop that embodiment of the soul, the higher self, they're going to have a really hard time. There's not going to be much of a reason to hang out around here in the middle of such control, because the control is really unpleasant. And people are really suffering with it, I would say. I certainly will admit that I'm suffering with it. I can't stand it.
But I think another theme that you weave in with the characters is how in the midst of that turmoil and in the midst of this turbulence we're in this transformational time, how to not get caught in fear. And how when we can, and you talk a lot about the ways that we open the pineal gland, we open to that multidimensional consciousness, then we can see the larger perspective and we can straddle the worlds, but not get mired in the fear and trauma of the turbulence that we're in.
That's a basic one, the issue of going beyond fear. And with all the characters all the way through, that's a major issue, because the minute you're caught in fear, you're trapped. And and people, a lot of people, it has really hurt me to see some of my friends cave in, some of my relatives cave in, some of the pressure on me because of the life that I live. And yet I understand what's going on with them. They're just terrified right now because they never imagine that what's going on right now it could happen. And yet if you analyze what's been going on with public health and some of the issues regarding medicine and all this was inevitable. And here we are. And each person, it really matters what each person thinks and does.
Well, and it's, I think it is part of what is, why astrology is such a gift, because it gives us that larger perspective of what is unfolding, what is the deeper meaning of what's happening in these times, and how do we work with that in a more conscious way, rather than getting caught in the tumult of the moment and getting caught in fear. And you really emphasize that across the books. And Claudia, in particular, that character is often attuning to the astrological energies of the time and giving the other characters insight out of that. And it feels
I
like
was actually kind of surprised that came in. I've never introduced astrology in my work that way, except in astrology books. And what happened was that the transit in 2020 is actually, the main transit is actually a 735-year cycle. And there's 3 of those 735-year cycles during each great age, I've discovered by doing research. And yeah, and so the fact that that cycle came through in 2020 means that we're just starting the first 735-year cycle of the Age of Aquarius. And so there's going to be 3 distinct levels there. And I think that as hard as it is right now, I have a feeling that there's going to be a wonderful lightening coming for a lot of people. Even though the outside third dimensional reality may be very difficult, I think people, almost like fish that are ready to swim through a net where the holes are, where they're still small enough before the hole is going to catch them. I think there's just going to be a lot of fish swimming through those holes and wandering into altogether new waters. I think there's going to be a quickening and an awakening that I think for those of us who are really deep thinkers, I think it's going to help a lot. And at the same time, everybody's split in 2 right now, aren't they? So then you're going to see the people who are kind of on the other side of this thing, maybe almost dismayed that freedom, some kind of freedom is coming. Certainly the people who are trying to be in control aren't going to be happy about it. But I don't think they're going to get us. I really don't.
I would totally agree with you, because I think those deeper energies of cosmic consciousness are guiding us all through this transformational time. And another piece that I wanted to circle back to is that astrological understanding, and what we've now found with research, geological research on the planet, is that the planet goes through these major cataclysmic changes around every 12,000 years. And that we're at that cusp again, that it comes at the beginning of a precessional cycle and the midpoint. And that it's also marked by when Sedna comes into our inner solar system. And I found your book, it used to be called Catastrophobia, but now it's Awakening the Planetary.
Yeah, the publisher changed the title, and it's too bad,
I liked the first title.
I liked Catastrophobia too, but oh well.
But it's so profound in terms of how you talk about, if we don't bring that collective trauma that we carry at the cellular level and carry deep in our memories to consciousness, then we're in danger of reenacting the very thing that we fear. And that is a whole other theme that I think is at play right now, that can trigger that fear and survival anxiety in humanity, that then can create more spaciousness for the few who want power and control to work that fear to have power over. But it feels like that's a crucial theme.
Yeah, people have a lot of homework to do. And by the way, Catastrophobia is now called Awakening the Planetary Mind. And it's okay, different title, but it's also been extensively revised in terms of additional information 10 years after it was written. And what I'd like to say about that is that the only antidote to the fear of catastrophes is deepening your knowledge. And we're in the middle of an amazing cycle of deepening our knowledge right now, because we actually, at this point, have a pretty decent story about the planet and which people lived where and where people migrated at this point. Where even 10 years ago, we had a very distorted story. And what happened was the discovery of Göbekli Tepe,
Yes.
which is a site in Turkey, and also Karahan Tepe. There's a few sites actually, and the timeline has now been pushed back to right at the time of the cataclysm. And so people are in the middle of a profound awakening of the true story. Like in my case, I'm part Cherokee, and I was always told as a child that my ancestors actually came from the Mediterranean around 1500 BC, something like that. And now what's happened with Cherokee and the analysis of Cherokee DNA is we now have a story of the Cherokee migrations that exactly matches what I was told as a child. And the databank in catastrophophobia is actually the Cherokee databank. It's from my grandfather. And so as you deal with the fear maybe of volcanoes or of like this eruption of La Palma in the Canaries is so fascinating because it's right on that Atlantean, what I want to say, geological system. I've been just fascinated by that. I think it's a real awakening of consciousness. So if you know a lot about the ancient people and you realize what they've gone through and the story of the times, then you start to realize that, well, yeah, in my lifetime, I might experience a cataclysm, but it's all part of the human story. And none of it has anything to do with fear. There's no reason to fear. As I told you early on in this interview, Heather, I've done 100 of my own past life regressions. And so I've died over and over and over again. And I can tell you that the minute you approach that death point, say it's a cataclysm, a quick death, you just go right out of your body and you go right into the light. You just soar up to this exquisite blue light. And the only people who get traumatized are the people who saw you die. The people around you who see somebody die, they get all freaked out. Like with COVID these days, people being intubated and their relatives is seeing stuff like that happening. Very traumatic for the people who have to see that, especially the nurses and the health staff and stuff. Yeah. But the point is, when we die, we just go to the light. And it's really true. I experience it over and over again.
Well, and as we near the end of the interview, I think it's so important that if we don't get caught in fear, if we realize that this time is a time where the earth herself is going through a profound transformation, and that we have the capacity collectively to undergo this incredible healing and spiritual awakening to, as you describe in the books, open to this multi-dimensional consciousness and come back into connection with the galactic community. It's a time of amazing expansion if we open to that and don't get caught in fear. But I think that's, you talk a lot in the books about we're at a turning point, and that this is a choice point for each of us individually in terms of how we work with the energies of this time.
Mm-hmm. And in past books, I've referred to this time as the cosmic party. And you don't want to miss the cosmic party by shutting down into fear. Because when you shut down into fear, you just go down to this minimal space. And so I would like to make one comment about what we've been experiencing with COVID the last couple of years. And that is that people have been forced into a lot of isolation. A lot of people have had to let their jobs go. And so, of course, I talk to as many people as I can. And day after day after day, I have conversations with people who say, guess what I did during these last 18 months? There's so many people who have found parts of themselves after working on a mundane job for 10 or 15 years that stultified them. And so this is another sign to me that nobody's going to beat down the human race, because people will just transform into something else. And that's what they're doing. They're discovering art, they're discovering beauty, they're discovering love. And so as you can tell, I'm quite an optimist. And it wasn't easy during the last 18 months to be an optimist.
Well, I think, yeah, but I think we've seen, as you were saying earlier, that increasing polarization of people that are also contracting and getting caught more in fear. But like you, and one of the things that's been just such a gift for me is to do astrology readings now. You and I were talking about the gifts of Zoom, doing astrology readings with people from all over the world and seeing the level of awakening that's happening, and people who are opening to these expansive spiritual energies that are coming back to the heart, that are moving in these wildly creative directions. It's exhilarating to see that.
Yes.
And, before we have to stop, I would love just your take on some of what you see as our trajectory in the coming years from an astrological perspective. Because for me, I think 2025 is a crucial turning point with the ending of the Kali Yuga and the movement of Pluto into Aquarius. But I also see 2032 as a critical turning point. But I'd love to hear what you are seeing as you look out.
I haven't, because of what I've been in the middle of with the book, I have not been able to look very far ahead. And I also did notice 2032 as obviously being a great turning point. But what I have felt all year that I think is really relevant right now is that the whole 2021, the whole year of 2021 has been under the crunch of the Saturn Square Uranus transit. And the first one was like February 17th, I think, and the second one was in middle of June sometime. And then the third and final square between December. Saturn and Uranus is interesting, Christmas Eve day. So on the day of Christmas, what do we get? We get the final square. I'm already noticing in the last few weeks, in the last month, there seems to be an easing up from that crunch from that square. So I think that we're going to be released with third square, and I think things are going to start feeling better. I really do. And that's pretty much where I've left it. I've just been enduring the three squares because in my life, it took everything and crunched it and turned it in. I've had to move. I've had to do all kinds of things to cope with reality. But I think that people are going to start to feel an easing up. Don't you think, when those squares are complete?
I absolutely agree with you. And, I could talk with you for hours, but I'd love to talk just about that sometime with you about that whole Saturn Uranus cycle, because this cycle that we've now been in the third square started in February 1988, 6 months after the harmonic convergence. And in 2032, we'll have the new cycle with Saturn and Uranus. And the one that began in 1988 was at 29 degrees of Sagittarius in alignment with the galactic center.
Right. Yeah.
And the one that will come to in June 2032 in the sky, the Sun, Uranus, Saturn, Mars, and Venus will all be in the upraised arm of Orion. So I think it's signaling to us we have this capacity for resurrection, for moving into these new paradigms if we let ourselves open to it.
Yeah. And I think the reason this phase this year, Saturn Square Uranus, was so difficult is Saturn Square Uranus makes all of the issues that need to be resolved go into us, and it works through us. And so I've been seeing people get divorces because one person got a vaccine and the other one didn't. I've just been seeing just the most incredible conflicts for people because of that Saturn Uranus working through us. But then when it's finished this year, it's going to start working through the collective, and it's going to be not as hard on the individual, I think. I think this is really the hardest part of it.
I totally agree with you. And I think you mentioned in your book that movement of Saturn and Jupiter, moving into Aquarius, helping with that shift. And I think you also talk so in depth in the book about how some of our experience with COVID and this turmoil has been with the combination of Saturn, Jupiter, and Pluto in Capricorn.
Yeah.
So it feels like we have been in that process of the breakdown of the structures and how it's impacting us personally and collectively. But I agree with you, after that third square of Saturn and Uranus, I think we're going to be moving more and more into feeling the potential of these new paradigms that are the paradigms of the Aquarian age.
It's like we've been isolated by the way society has responded to COVID. And so we've been stuck in that Saturn Square Uranus. But then at Christmas, it's finished. And then I think we're going to see amazing stuff happening in the collective, in the global realm. And I think we're not going to feel like it's all stuck in me, because it's awful.
That's true. It's like being in a pressure cooker.
Yeah, right. And then, as I mentioned on one show recently, Saturn is kind of uncomfortable in Aquarius, and Uranus is kind of uncomfortable in Taurus, just by their nature. And so
that's a really good point.
So I'll be glad when that one's over with, and maybe we'll talk next year sometime. Right now, I have to focus on this trilogy, but maybe we'll have do an astrological talk about the future sometime. It'd be fun.
Oh, I would love that, Barbara.
Yeah.
And before we sign off, I just wanted to say I loved the titles of your books.
Well, thank you.
And how, and I'm sure this was intentional, but Revelations of the Ruby Crystal is reminding us of the power of this 2D reality, and how the crystals connect us to the deep wisdom of the earth, but also the stars. And then you have Revelations of the Aquarian Age, which is more at the 6th-dimensional level, right? The energy of the stars. And then you end with Revelations from the Source, which is really talking about that expansion into the 9 dimensions. So I thought that was beautiful, that sequencing.
Well, thank you. And all of it was unintentional. The titles usually come just before the book is ready to come out. I always do that. And publishers often try to get me to change my mind, but once I get it, I stick with it.
Well, I felt like there was such a powerful energetic in the titles themselves. So
thank you.
So thank you, Barbara.
So much work, and such a joy to be able to just sit down and talk about it.
Well, I'm so grateful to you and for your work and for how you embody these energies we're moving into. And I am so glad to be supporting this trilogy and it getting out there more widely.
Well, thank you. And from my heart, I really appreciate it, because I really think this book could help people.
Yeah.
This trilogy, the whole trilogy. I think fiction gives us a chance to hear very complicated material sometimes, but in a storytelling form and not analytic. And I think it's time for that, with me at least.
Well, and again, it pulls us into the heart and out of the mind, and particularly out of the left brain mind.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Heather.